And I'm glad to welcome on stage people from Rhea Group. Please have a seat. You can take your microphones. I think Greg Weiler might have forgotten his glasses. Thank you. It's just a turn. Yeah. So, thank you for our first session dedicated to the risk governance model for supply chain cybersecurity in space. We have two keynote speakers from the Rhea Group, and this is already the occasion for me to thank the Rhea Group, who's one of our biggest sponsors. So thank you for your support and interest. Rhea Group is an international company founded in 1992 that now employs more than 800 people all over the world. Our speakers today are Anna Maria Matejic. So after being a security consultant and an engineer, you were a senior manager at CyberArk, responsible for Central Eastern Europe and Turkey, before joining the Performant Group and eventually becoming what you're today, the Director of Cybersecurity Services and Operations at Rhea Group. You're also a member of the advisory group at the EU Agency for Cybersecurity, right? And we also have Matteo Merialdo. You were a software engineer architect and developer at IFM Infomaster before joining the Rhea Group, where you conquered your position of business director of security, engineer, and product. You've been involved in many European projects. You're an expert for the European Commission in artificial intelligence and cybersecurity, and you also contributed to the definition of the European Space Agency's Cybersecurity Center of Excellence. Thank you to both of you for being here today. So let's get us started. What can you tell us about the risk governance model for supply chain cybersecurity in space?
Thank you very much for the introduction. Good morning, everyone. It's a privilege to be here as a speaker this year. And before we reach to the main theme of the presentation, I'd like to actually speak a little bit about why did we come up with this topic, first of all. So Rhea has been in the space industry for the last 30 years. And this means that in time, we have been covering the whole end-to-end mission services, which basically brought us to cover the topic of the supply chain today at the conference. What we've been doing at the European level, together with our partners ESA and EUSPA, were projects that were targeted around delivering specialized space asset cyber emulation environment, projects that were providing a cyber range solution for threat risk assessment on the LEO satellite constellation. And last but not the least important, of course, in the current context is training services for the ESA operator on security awareness and risk. And speaking about supply chain, I believe that the most important is to set the right stage in general in the international context, especially that today we are seeing more and more international cooperation in terms of space-related conversations. We have also been witnessing space and cybersecurity becoming new strategic enablers for nations, both at the European level, but also worldwide. And not only that they became strategic enablers for nations, but they became key to matters concerning national security, and also key in matters concerning the economic development. Also, if we come back and look at the EU level, we understood, at least in the last couple of years, that the EU recognizes the importance of the space, by placing it lately in the critical sectors category. And it's very important from a cooperation perspective, but also from a services provided by space perspective. When we look into the European member states, I believe it's important to understand that we really need to focus and to pool our limited resources that we have and find ways to complement our activities in matters concerning the whole value chain. Also, something that is not new for us, and it keeps being repeated in the last couple of years, are the consequences of a cyber attack over the space infrastructure. And we have had quite some examples in the last 2 years at least, in ranges coming from a temporary disruption to complete mission failures. I think that when we speak about the supply chain specifically, this is a topic that gained a lot of traction in the last 2 years, mostly in events, and also when I look into the projects that at least we are doing in cooperation with our partners. And today, once I finish the introduction into the supply chain matters, my colleague Matteo here will actually go through a project that we are currently developing together with ESA and other partners in matters concerning the supply chain. Even though we speak about the supply chain topic for the last 2 years quite intensively, the matter has been around in the last 10 years, I would say, or more. And if I look back into 2014, we have an example coming from US, from NOAA, so from the agency that is in charge with the meteorological, let's say, data. At that point in time, and I will not go into details because I'm not sure it's the right time also from a timing perspective today. At that time, the data that was provided by the space satellites was altered in a way that other players in the sector, so if we think only about the transportation sector, were affected. And there's just an example to illustrate the fact that, yes, we are concerned about the supply chain, and we speak a lot in the last 2 years, but the matter has been around for the last 10 years. And this says a lot about the inability so far to control the whole spectrum when we speak about the supply chain, and to find actually the right solution on how to address each topic that concerns it. And that's why I think that the supply chain itself, it's not an entirely controllable aspect. And why is that? It's because there are too many parts involved. But before digging into the parts that are involved in a supply chain, I think that from a governance perspective, internationally, the community has agreed that we have to look into 3 main directions. The international governance, and this is mostly from the cooperation and the law and regulatory perspective. And I think at the European level, we've been seeing lately more and more countries adopting national space laws. Another very important direction is, of course, the cyber and the risk aspect. And last but not the least important is the future of the space governance in relation to sustainability. So because sustainability, it's hot topic today on Earth, but of course it became very important also for the space sector. When we speak about the cybersecurity in space, I think it's very important to understand that the cyber aspect starts before we actually build the assets and they become operational. So when we speak about the supply chain, of course, we have to have the risk-based mindset. And the supply chain, basically, if we look at it from an image perspective, it's the trust, is the foundation of trust when we speak about space activities. The governance, I'm sure that you all know here the definition, but it's never too late to repeat it. The governance speaks about consistent procedures and adequate procedures for our supplier network to identify the security risks before they arise. And because it's a very broad question, I think that the question that arises as the next one is just how much is too much? You know, how much can we use the term governance on the whole spectrum of the supply chain? And to understand the supply chain, I think it's always very good to visualize it. So the chain starts basically with the smallest details when it comes to producing elements for the space missions, okay? So if you look at a mission where we have astronauts, we have to also think about the food that is being produced for them. We have to think about data centers to store the information. We have to think about materials to assemble, for example, satellites. From a space perspective, of course, we need, after all these things are produced, we need to supply them to the respective assembly lines. And then the operations part is very important, including the ground segments, and they are also very exposed when it comes to cybersecurity threats. Then we have the applications that are involved in the space missions, and very important, the final beneficiaries of the space actions and the space missions. Different sectors that are as well critical infrastructure players. What does that mean? It means that space, by being defined as a critical infrastructure sector and being under a constant threat from a cyber perspective, can also have negative, not only positive effects, but negative effects in the other critical infrastructure sectors, like transportation, for example. And it's exactly the exemplar from 2014 that I just mentioned earlier, when a disruption in space-generated data created also disruptions in other sectors of critical importance, like transportation. And I think that a very recent example that everyone is talking about, and I know that today and tomorrow there are going to be special presentations around this topic, is the CYSAT attack from last year. I'm using it today as a grounds of explaining the importance of addressing the cyber factor in the supply chain, because actually the attack did not target the satellite itself, but just a single part of the network that was consumer-oriented. And while I don't have the time to go into details, I think that it's important to understand that the attack surface was not limited only to at that time, the Ukrainian security service and government, but it also had effects spread around Europe. For example, in Germany, there was a company managing remotely the wind turbines, and they were left without the ability to monitor this. In France, there is a telecom operator that was left without the ability for some of the subscribers to have connectivity services. And that's actually a very good illustration of the supply chain again. Now, from the attack perspective, and what we've learned is that it's a proliferation of vulnerabilities. And if we look at what researchers have found, is the fact that everything goes back as early as 2019. And remember, last year it was 2022. When there was a vulnerability for which a patch has been provided, but obviously not applied. And that vulnerability was exploited eventually by the attackers to generate the 2022 consequences. And that leaves us with the question, okay, how do we treat the topic of the supply chain cybersecurity? How do we govern even the whole spectrum involved in the supply chain, as I illustrated earlier with the picture? I think it might sound the basic right now, but well, a minimum supplier checklist for cybersecurity hygiene is always a good start. And having a risk-based mindset in all the activities that we do as players in the whole supply chain part is another very important thing. And when we speak about risk-based mindset, automatically, at least the more technical part of our businesses is thinking about adopting frameworks that could support this. And I think that today we have two very important frameworks that are actually helping to support the risk-based mindset. The one that is relatively new is the MITRE System of Trust framework. And well, it's very important and it's very interesting. It's a very interesting framework from the perspective of creating consistent supply chain security assessment and risk discussions around it. And the second one is, of course, the proposal from NIST side for commercial space operations. I believe that these two are contributing in a very valuable way today into addressing the governance, at least in the supply chain part. At the operational level, as well, we have seen a few things that are very important, and they translate from they also translate from the usual operational activities, having always an incident response plan and understand how to apply this plan to our external suppliers, right? So across the whole supply chain, conducting source code analysis, having a good vendor risk management, and last but not the least, firmware verification, especially if we look into the memory chips production, as many times we don't know exactly where they are manufactured. And to continue with a very good example that I already promised at the beginning of the presentation, I will let Matteo presenting actually the project that we are currently developing together with ESA and our partners.
Thanks a lot, Anna. Is that one? So I will briefly present. This is quite an interesting activity that we are conducting with the European Space Agency. And it's about security for manufacturing, assembly, integration, and testing processes, which are supply chain, which suffer of supply chain problems. Of course, MIT processes are extremely important in the space sector because all the components for a space mission, of course, they need to go through these processes, which are very long and include multiple vendors, multiple tiers of vendors and providers. So the compromission of the MIT processes is extremely dangerous for the success of a space system. So we started with this activity, which is funded by ESA GSTP. We are working with ENGIE Laborelec and SABCA. SABCA is providing our MIT use cases. And basically, to connect to what Anna was saying before, what we are taking is a risk-based approach. So we analyze processes in a way by which it can be replicable and can be done also for other processes. We analyze the risk and the most important data to be controlled. And then we make an analysis over security measures that can be applied at a very granular level for the most critical processes and also at an high level, considering a complete holistic view, including governance, including technical measures, but also including over the state-of-the-art techniques like zero trust architecture, homomorphic encryption, blockchain, even if blockchain we left a little bit aside for various reasons that maybe we can discuss at our booth. And last but not least, we will develop a set of guidelines for the space sector to secure complex MIT processes. And in terms of the activities, we started by selecting a couple of very relevant MIT processes within SABCA. We made a very comprehensive risk analysis of these processes, and we elicited a set of risk scenarios. Then we elicited a set of security controls, and then we took those processes and we are now emulating them within our cyber range technology, in their entire complexity, of course. In this way, then, we can test the attacks that are coming, that are linked to the risk scenario that we elicited, and we can also test the countermeasures. Then we will provide the additional study over the state-of-the-art techniques, and then we will make, and we already started in reality as of today, dissemination on the topic because it's very relevant. And what we want is to provide a method that can be replicated also by other space players. So the selection of the MIT process, of course, is coming from SABCA, and we wanted to cover the entire spectrum from the specification to the hardware design, to the software design, to the mechanical design, up to the 3D printing, or to the build-up of the space components themselves. So we really try to cover a couple of MIT processes which are linked to rockets components, which I'm not going to disclose which one, but they are quite complete in their entirety. And then we analyzed, and that was interesting because, of course, they have all their processes already listed in-house. But what was very interesting is that when we came to the analysis of these processes to produce components for their rockets, we really had to dig deeper into all the supply chain of vendors and end tires companies. So we went up to the raw material producers. That was very interesting. So we reconstructed the process, the case study, if you want, and we realized that, for example, for those two components, there are up to 5 companies, plus the raw material 4 and 5th tire suppliers. So it's a very complex chain where one organization produces a specification, another organization produces the 3D printing, another organization makes the assembly, the integration, and everything is shipped back to SABCA for the final integration. So that was very interesting also for them to start tracing the processes into a very comprehensive, coherent manner. Very interesting also that we analyzed, at least up to a certain level, the networks of those organizations, and we realized that all of them, they have IT and OT networks with different security constraints and different security issues. That was very interesting also. And then what we did, we used the eBIOS in combination with MITRE ATT&CK framework, as Anna was mentioning, in order to elicit first a set of strategic risk scenarios, so quite high level, but very comprehensive. Then the critical scenarios has been nailed down into a set of attack scenarios using the MITRE ATT&CK framework. Very detailed. We really studied all the possibilities to perform attacks within those risk scenarios. Really in the details of exploit, etc., because we had also all the information about the assets of the organization. And then we listed 16 critical scenarios. I'm not going through them, of course, but one of the most important, well, if not the most important, is linked to a state attack over the product development life cycle. So basically over the data that are transmitted from the prime, in sense of blueprints for the components, to the 3D printers, to the assemblers, etc. So that was has been listed as one of the most important, most dangerous attacks, because it starts at the beginning of the supply chain, really from the moment of the design of the blueprints. Then we analyze a set of attack scenarios, very detailed, using the MITRE ATT&CK framework. And then we decided to take one of these attack scenarios and to implement the attack scenario within the cyber range emulation that we are building. And Just one of the use cases is the situation of the 3D printing. So in this scenario, assuming that the data are transmitted in a non-secure way, they are transmitted from company 1 to company 3. Company 3 is 3D printing the piece of hardware for the rocket, then is shipping back to company 2, which is then shipping back to company 1. In all this chain, if at the beginning in the transmission of the data there is a compromission, then of course everything that is coming down is compromised. Then of course SABCA, and in this specific situation they have the measures in place, but the attack is realistic because other players may not have all the measures in place. So we took this case, we reconstructed in quite a lot of detail, and then we reconstructed completely all the elements, the technical elements that compose the scenario from the 3 different companies. And that we modeled and then we put into the cyber range for the emulation. So that was quite a lot of work, but is very interesting to really test the attack scenario in practice. Then the attack scenario has been modeled and then is going to be implemented in the emulation. And then, of course, what it comes out is that there are a set of security measures, very detailed security measures that can be applied to the different organizations in different segments of their networks. But the interesting thing is that for this specific use case, we went into a lot of details. But we could have stayed a little bit higher level, still on the risk scenario from the EBIOS analysis, and still provide quite a lot of interesting details. Then what you can do is, as we did, you go to the critical scenarios and you analyze them in more details, and then you elicit the security measures. And then if you want to do even better, you can emulate and you can test them. Then I'm not going through the details, but we have also other use cases linked to the attack scenario, very interesting, which we are going to study, but there's not enough time to go into the details of this. Last but not least, I was talking about the demonstrator. So we took our CyberRange technology. We know the assets of those different use cases. We are emulating them into the CyberRange, and then we are going to implement the cyber attacks, including the security measures that we elicit. In this way, we can test if the security measures are enough to protect against the cyber attacks. Then the demonstrator is going to be portable because ESA wants to be able to bring it in different venues and to show it live. That's nice. And the interesting thing is also that we are developing a special version of the interface to be able to model different MIT processes. So not only one, but we want to be able to model different ones. So when you make your analysis, your risk scenario, then you can pick the ones that are more critical, and those ones you can model in the cyber range in order to test if, in fact, the security measures are enough. And to conclude the activity, well, what is very important that is coming out is that the risk mitigation is not only technical, of course, as Anna was saying, but is really an holistic type of activity for this type of processes. So it needs to include governance, it needs to include architecture, etc. And last but not least, we are going to finish the study by, as I was saying before, considering new techniques like homomorphic encryption, zero trust architecture, to see if there is some game changer in the loop that can provide an additional level of security with respect to the traditional security measures. I hope it was interesting. It was a bit fast, but to be honest, it's one of the many projects that we have that really is really interesting because it's new and it brings also some concrete results out of the table. And Anna, do you have any final remark?
I think a final remark from our side would be actually a question that I've been hearing around events lately when the topic of cyber supply chain for space comes on the table. Is exactly, so okay, we're talking about engineering, like Matteo was explaining the projects that we are doing, but what kind of profiles from a people perspective do we need to address the supply chain cyber aspect for space? And I think that from our perspective and given the experience that we have already, we speak about a variety of profiles coming from the engineering part, but also from the legal side, because it's very important when we deal with a lot of suppliers to have the right legal foundations. Also, from a consulting experience perspective, it's very important to have a wide view over the whole. So remember the picture in my slide of the supply chain. I think that we have to operate at all times with that picture in our minds. So it's not a simple answer about how do we solve it technically and how do we solve it from a people perspective. I think today we don't even have a specific training that we can indicate. Yeah, go there and you will learn how to deal with the cybersecurity for the supply chain. It's an open question, but at least so far the answer from our side and given our experience, it's what I've said before. Do you have anything to add, Matteo?
Actually, we have a question from the audience. Thank you for the stimulating presentation, and even the case study. It offers a great view of what Rhea Group can offer for solutions. We have a question from someone in the audience. I'm displaying it live. It should appear in a few minutes. It's, are you looking at cryptographic governance and cryptographic agility, being able to automate changes in digital certificates, private keys, signing keys, and so on? A question from Pierre Codus. You can see it there too.
Yeah, we are looking at that in the context of this project. I cannot give you too many details about it because those are my guys that are working on that. But definitely that's part of the security measures that we are considering, from a little bit higher level, from a governance perspective, but also from the lower level. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, we have time for another one. Another question from Mark Loveday. The question is, are you considering or have you considered the use of blockchain technologies to underpin the supply chain ledger?
So, yes. In reality, in the proposal that we made for this project was very based on blockchain technology to protect the ledger. And then we started making analysis when we saw the MIT processes. Then we went deeper into details. And what it came out that for various reasons, so far, the most efficient security measures to apply, aside from the application of homomorphic encryption, which we are still studying, in reality, from an efficiency perspective, from an applicability perspective, the traditional security measures in this environment, our evaluation is that they are more efficient than trying to change completely the product development life cycle and including supply chain ledgers. So yes, we started with that in mind. We made an initial analysis with Anna and with some engineers, but then during the study, well, what it comes out is that in this specific context, the traditional measures seem still to be more efficient and more cost and time effective, if you want.
Okay, thank you very much. One last. Do you require your suppliers to have the software being common criteria certified? Yeah, I can display it.
So it depends on the criticality of the activity. If we are working at low TRL, if we are working at something that is not classified, not necessarily, but there is a risk assessment procedure that we use every time that we do engineering activities. So if the activity is high TRL, if it is classified, definitely yes. Part of the requirements are linked to common criteria. In reality, linked to that, I diverge a little bit. We are working quite a lot with the novel EU cybersecurity certification framework from ENISA, and I think we have quite a lot of experience with that. And then we would like then to apply our framework, our risk analysis framework for engineering activities with the usage of the EU cyber certification framework. But definitely, yes, there is an analysis but really depends on the criticality of the activity.
Thank you very much for your presence. Thank you again to Rhea Group for its support and sponsoring of this event. We are now launching the coffee break that will last until 11. Thank you. Please be back at 11. I'm standing up, sorry. Please be back at 11 for another conference on the war in Ukraine from a cybersecurity perspective. You introduced the topic very well. Thank you very much.